Welcome back. We're in Second Chronicles, and we're on chapter 35 today. We're talking about King Josiah, who was a good king, but he screwed up at some point in his kingship. He was doing so well. He was being so blessed by the sacrifices that he was making for God. But then he decided to interfere with God's plan, even though he didn't know it was God's plan, which led to his downfall. So the main points that I've taken from this is that when you sacrifice to God, it's not a one-way blessing. You're not just blessing God because he turns around and blesses you. And a lot of times he blesses you even more than you blessed him. And on the flip side, if you try to interfere with God's plan, we see what happens to people in the Bible when they do this, and it's never a good idea, and it's never a good outcome. So let's read about King Josiah. All right, let's pray. Dear Lord, please add wisdom, knowledge, and understanding to the reading of this word. Help it to bless our lives to better do your will. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so Josiah celebrates Passover. Then Josiah announced that the Passover of the Lord would be celebrated in Jerusalem. Wait, let me adjust my phone here. On the appointed day in early spring. The Passover lambs were slaughtered at twilight of that day. Josiah also assigned the priests to their duties and encouraged them in their work at the temple of the Lord. He issued this order to the Levites, who had been set apart to serve the Lord and were teachers in Israel. Since the ark is now in Solomon's temple, and you do not need to carry it back and forth on your shoulders, spend your time serving the Lord your God and his people Israel. Report for duty according to the family divisions of your ancestors, following the written instructions of King David of Israel and the instructions of his son Solomon. Then stand in your appointed holy places and help the families assigned to you as they bring their offerings to the temple. Slaughter the Passover lambs, purify yourselves, and prepare to help those who come. Follow all the instructions that the Lord gave through Moses. Then Josiah contributed from his personal property 30,000 lambs and young goats for the people's Passover offerings, and 3,000 bulls. The king's officials also made willing contributions to the people, priests, and Levites. Hilkiah, Zechariah, and Jehiel, the administrators of God's temple, gave the priests 2,600 lambs and young goats and 300 bulls as Passover offerings. The Levite leaders, Conaniah and his brother Shemaiah and Nethanel, and Hashabiah, Jael, and Jozabad gave 5,000 lambs and young goats and 500 bulls to the Levites for their Passover offerings. When everything was ready for the Passover celebration, the priests and the Levites took their places, organized by their divisions according to the king's orders. The Levites then slaughtered the Passover lambs and presented the blood to the priests, who sprinkled the blood on the altar while the Levites prepared the animals. They divided the burnt offerings among the people by their family groups, so they could offer them to the Lord according to the instructions recorded in the book of Moses. They did the same with the bulls. Then they roasted the Passover lambs as prescribed, and they boiled the holy offerings in pots, kettles, and pans, and brought them out quickly so the people could eat them. Afterwards, the Levites prepared a meal for themselves and for the priests, because the priests had been busy from morning till night offering the burnt offerings and the fat portions. The Levites took responsibility for all these preparations. The musicians, descendants of Asaph, were in their assigned places following the orders given by David. Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun, the king's seer. The gatekeepers guarded the gates and did not need to leave their posts of duty, for their meals were brought to them by their fellow Levites. The entire ceremony for the Lord's Passover was completed that day. All the burnt offerings were sacrificed on the altar of the Lord as King Josiah had ordered. All the Israelites present in Jerusalem celebrated Passover and the festival of unleavened bread for 7 days. Never since the time of the prophet Samuel had there been such a Passover. None of the kings of Israel had ever kept a Passover as Josiah did, involving all the priests and Levites, all the people of Jerusalem, and all people from all over Judah and Israel. This Passover celebration took place in the 18th year of Josiah's reign. All right, so now we get to the point where Josiah, he screws up. Verse 20, after Josiah had finished restoring the temple, King Necho of Egypt led his army up from Egypt to do battle at Carchemish on the Euphrates River, and Josiah and his army marched out to fight him. But King Necho sent ambassadors to Josiah with this message: "What do you want with me, King of Judah? I have no quarrel with you today. I only want to fight the nation with which I am at war, and God has told me to hurry. Do not interfere with God who is with me, or he will destroy you." But Josiah refused to listen to Necho, to whom God had indeed spoken, and he would not turn back. Instead, he led his army into battle on the plain of Megiddo. He laid aside his royal robes so the enemy would not recognize him, but the enemy's archers hit King Josiah with their arrows and wounded him. He cried out to his men, "Take me from the battle, for I am badly wounded." So they lifted Josiah out of his chariot and placed him in another chariot. Then they brought him back to Jerusalem, where he died. He was buried there in the royal cemetery, and all Judah and Jerusalem mourned for him. The prophet Jeremiah composed funeral songs for Josiah, and to this day, choirs still sing these sad songs about his death. These songs of sorrow have become a tradition and are recorded in the book of Laments. The rest of the events of Josiah's reign and his acts of devotion, done according to the written law of the Lord, from beginning to end, are recorded in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. So that's the end of that chapter. Welcome, the Wilsons and Gloria Snell. Welcome. Thanks for joining. If you have any questions or comments about what we read, please leave them down there and let's talk about it. All right, so the main takeaways I got from this was that there's blessings you receive when you sacrifice. So essentially, you receive when you give to God, and we see that with the sacrifices, right? All the way up to Jesus, right? So back in the day, you had to sacrifice animals, and basically what they would do is they would cut these animals open and they'd take out the fat and other organs, and they'd burn them on the fire. But I think the majority, or at least a portion of the meat, was set aside, and the person sacrificing would get to eat it. Especially and also the Levites and the priests would get to eat from that sacrifice as well. So sacrifices, they are, a sacrifice to God, but they also benefit the person sacrificing. And the same goes today. Now, we don't have to sacrifice animals and stuff, right? But we sacrifice our ego, right? And our behavior. So we give up our ego. Like, for example, when somebody wrongs us, and if we are a true believer and Christian, then we are called to not retaliate, not react in a negative way. We're called to be ambassadors for God, which means that we're supposed to give people a positive experience when they meet us, not a negative, because that just only drives them once it makes people want to avoid God and avoid Christianity. Because they get a bad taste in their mouth with certain Christians, they hold that against God and against Christianity, Christians as a whole. Even though, I mean, you could find somebody in any faith or belief system who's a jerk, and somehow that doesn't distract people from still believing in, evolution or Hindu or whatever it may be, right? So it's kind of an interesting thing. Uh, oh, thanks for subscribing, the Wilsons. It's just me, you in the chat. Yeah, it looks like it's just you now. I had Gloria, who gave a wave. I don't know if she's still here or not, but I see there's like 3 people watching right now. So, anyways, so yeah, you get a blessing when you sacrifice to God. So when we give up our ego and we go ahead and take the high ground, as they say, when somebody goes low on us, we may not receive any sort of immediate benefit, like when they sacrificed the animals and they received meat back in return, pretty much, immediately. Uh, Now you have to kind of just know that when you do this, when you are good to people, even when they're bad to you, that you are storing up treasures in heaven for yourself. And God's looking down on this and applauding you for doing the right thing. And conversely, when somebody is nasty to you and then you just throw it right back, of course God can't applaud that. He's probably feeling really bad and hoping that that other person doesn't just get turned off of God and Christianity forever after that. Because that's all it takes for some people. People nowadays are very, very sensitive. And so if you misrepresent God and Christianity to someone because you're having a bad day too, and who hasn't done that? I do it. I look, as much love as I have for people, I can't stand most people. And the older I get, the less patience I have for people, and the less I even want to be around people. And it's unfortunate and sad, but I have to really watch myself because heck, I was in the Marines. I know how to cuss someone out. I know how to make someone cry with just words. Like a drill instructor. But I have to refrain from unleashing that because that doesn't serve God's purpose, right? And my life and any life of any Christian is supposed to be about serving God's purpose. So, all right, moving along. Yeah, so I pretty much just noted here on verse 13. It says, Then they roasted the Passover lambs as prescribed, and they boiled the holy offerings in pots, kettles, and pans, and brought them out quickly so the people could eat them. So, as you can see, right, people brought these Passover, animals that they owned, so they are sacrificing their possessions to please God in this ritual, but it isn't like they give these. It's like giving money. It's like giving money, almost like giving a tithe, but then they give you a large portion or a portion of that tithe right back, right? And I find this is how God works in my life. When I take a step towards God, He takes 2 or maybe even 3 steps back in my direction and blesses me for that action. Not all the time, but more often than not, I would say. And it's not always immediate, like back in the day when they were sacrificing the animals, because they basically sacrifice it, go fry it up, and then bring you out some of the meat. Thea Wilson says, "What happened? I'm sorry, so sorry. Sorry about what?" Nothing to be sorry for. Anyways, and so just Josiah was a great king, and he did a lot of good things. He did a lot of things correctly, and God blessed him for it. But I don't know. I mean, it says I don't know what he was thinking, but when King Necho of Egypt, apparently God spoke to King Necho. And I don't know anything about King Necho other than what it says here. And it doesn't say that he was a believer in God, but it definitely says that God did, in fact, speak to him and tell him to go attack this other nation for whatever reason. And I'd love to know the backstory on that because it's so interesting. But in any case, Josiah took it upon himself, and notice that he didn't consult God either before doing this. This is another very important thing. It's something that I have been trying to work on myself, and that's consulting God in like everything. If you ever have a tough decision of any sort of significance, you should really be trying to get in the practice of giving that to God and asking God, "Hey, give me guidance on this, please, God. Help me on this." Because if you go against the will of God, I mean, it could mean your life. And that's what happened to King Josiah. As much as he was a great ambassador and servant of God, he failed to really explore this claim by this King Necho that God had uh, essentially tasked him, mandated him to go and attack this other nation. And instead, King Josiah just said, "No, we're just going to go and try and stop this King Necho of Egypt." And it led to him getting hit by an arrow and he died. So imagine if he had just consulted with God, especially after King Necho told him that God sent him this mandate to go attack this nation. He apparently still didn't, think that he should consult God on this major action. Anytime you go to war against another nation, that's a major thing. So certainly in major issues in our lives, we need to be asking God for guidance, but even in the small things, the more you do it, the better off you are. Been so many times in my life I know that where I thought God was blessing me with something, and so I just went with it, and then come to find out, oh, it wasn't meant to be. So always consult God, and the more you humble yourself to God, and listen to God, the more you're going to hear Him. Sometimes it's hard to hear. Sometimes you don't want to hear the answer. Like maybe you're in a relationship or something, and you think this guy or girl is so great, but it's not the right one. He or she is not the right one, and God is communicating this to you subtly, right? He meets you where you meet him. So if you are very distant and you don't talk to God much, he'll respond and he'll give you messages, but they won't be as clear. At least for me, I've found this in my life in various varying stages of my walk with God. When I'm walking close to God and He gives me a message, I hear it quickly. When I'm not walking as close to God, it's harder to understand. Or when it's a situation where I want the answer to be one thing, but He's telling me another, and I'm like questioning, well, is that really God's message, or is it maybe the devil? Is maybe the devil just trying to trip me up, and take away this blessing that I have by giving me, these conflicting messages and stuff. But time always tells, and that's the beautiful thing. Unfortunately, once time finally tells you, it might be too late. So, anyways, that's all I have really for today, and it doesn't seem like anyone has any questions or comments on what we read or anything in general. If you do, please leave it now. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and sign off so I can go hit the gym. And thanks again to, is it Thea? Is it, or I don't end the stream. Okay. Well, I don't know what else to say. Thea, give me something to talk about. Let's talk to me, you know? What was the story about? Okay. It was about King Josiah. He's one of the kings of Judah, and he's one of the kings that was did pleasing in the sight of God. Uh, and one of the things he did that was pleasing was um, he reinstated the Passover celebration because that had been like lost in the tradition between what was the king's name right before that? Yeah, because it's during the reign of Josiah that Hilkiah discovers God's law. And the king before that was Manasseh, and he started out really bad. He was into, he basically ignored God, was into witchcraft, anything you can think of. He was putting idols all over the place, he was putting them in the temple. And then at some point, he just did a complete 180, turned everything around, and ended really well. Uh, of course, his son came in, and he didn't last very long because he did what was evil. But in any case, between the rule of, it seems like Manasseh, yeah, from probably about Manasseh's reign until Josiah's reign, roughly a generation passed. And in that time, they somehow misplaced the law of God and were not following it for a number of years. And then during Josiah's reign, again, the high priest found the book of the law, and so they started to follow what it said, and they realized, oh man, we haven't been celebrating Passover. So he initiates the celebration of Passover again, and then he does it big time. In fact, he does it apparently more than any other king had ever done prior. Like it says that it hadn't been, what did it say? Basically since the time of Samuel. Um, Basically that it hadn't been celebrated like that since the time of Samuel. Yeah. It says, never since, in verse 18, never since the time of the prophet Samuel had there been such a Passover. So he did it in grand scale, and he was doing really well, in terms of honoring God. But then he hears about this king in Egypt who goes and attacks some nation that is on the Euphrates River. And he just takes it upon himself that he needs to go out and attack Egypt and basically rescue this nation. Well, this Egyptian king, Necho, sends a message to Josiah that, hey, look, God is the one who told me to go do this. So don't interfere with God. It says, don't interfere with God who is with me, or he will destroy you. And then it says, but Josiah refused to listen to King Necho, to whom God had indeed spoken, and he would not turn back. So, yeah. And then the end result was he got hit with arrows and died. And all because he tried to interfere with God's plan. So, as much as he was promoting and fulfilling God's plan in a big way, he tried also to interfere with God's plan in some other aspect, and then he ended up getting killed. So that's why the two main like takeaways from this chapter was that basically that sacrifice blesses us, as much as we're blessing God, and that interfering with God's will is deadly, you know. And yeah, so I don't know what else to say now. By the way, the Wilsons, are you an adult or a child? I'm just curious because I was going through my subscriber list and I was kind of shocked by how many children are on that list. Because when you're setting up these videos, you have to select you have to select whether or not your content is for kids or not. And I always put no, and yet I'm getting all these kids. Okay, so you're a kid too. All right, how old are you? How old are you, and how are you finding this Bible study? Wow, so you're 7, and I'm just curious, like, because when I was 7, I wasn't watching. If even if there wasn't YouTube back then. I don't know how we were doing a live video. You say you were doing a live video, or what was your video about? Anyways, when I was 7, I even if there was a live Bible study, I probably would not have been watching it. So that's why I'm just a little like shocked that there's so many kids watching this. No, no, it's not that I don't want you to watch it. It's like I said, I'm just shocked that there's so many kids watching this. And just make sure your parents are okay with it too, because the Bible can get pretty brutal. Um, I was watching a film at a showing of a screening of different short films, and there was one film in particular that had some somewhat gruesome scenes in it, not horribly bad or anything. But the group that I was with, after it was over, one of the women started to talk about, I couldn't watch some of that, and then she said something like, oh, well, how do you reconcile um, doing making films with gore like that in it? And I'm like, well, I mean, if I mean, it really wasn't that bad, and if that's enough to make you, clutch the pearls, then how do you read the Bible? Because there's 10 times worse things going on in the Bible. Whole nations getting massacred. We haven't really, I don't think, I don't recall seeing any biblical films that really show, graphically what it must have been like when God had called, any nation, in particular Israel, to go and wipe out another nation. We're talking about men, women, children, pets. It says any living thing had to be destroyed. Basically, a lot of times when God would send, especially in the beginning when the Hebrews were going into the promised land, they had to basically cleanse that whole area of all the people and practices that were in the area. And that meant just completely and utterly annihilating every one of them, men, women, children. So, I mean, does it get much more gruesome than that? Oh, and then there's the fact that a lot of those nations in that area were worshiping different gods that would require them to sacrifice their children, their babies, in the fire. So I've never seen that in a biblical film, and I think the reason is because people wouldn't be able to handle it. Just like this lady couldn't even handle a little bit of tiny little bit of gore in this film. I'm surprised Passion of the Christ, didn't get more backlash because that was very gory. And yeah, so and now they're coming out with part two, so that'll be interesting. All right, well, I think I've rambled long enough, and it doesn't seem like you have any more questions. So thanks for joining, everyone, and thanks for subscribing, Wilson's. Yeah, all right, and your phone's at 1%. All right, it's a sign. Okay, we'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks so much.